this warm-up routine is going to drastically improve the quality of your squat and your performance long term. Because again, if you feel better going into your session, you're probably going to perform better. And if we stack that up over a long period of time, it's going to make a big difference. So
it's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk.
We're going to do very simplistic banded warm-up. You'll only need 2 bands, so this is not complex, but it's very, very effective, and it's going to hit all the main things. So first, we're going to start with a banded dead bug. Now, the reason why we're starting with this is because we want to be able to articulate with our limbs while maintaining good lumbopelvic stability and orientation. Everything starts with the core. If you don't know how to brace your core effectively, you cannot really do anything else. So we're going to start with that, improve your motor control, and that's going to help prime us for some of the other activities. So after that, we're going to go to a banded hip traction. So we're going to help work external rotation at the pelvis, and we're going to load into that hip. Okay, so just opening things up a little bit. Then we're going to go into a 90-90 band hip IR, or internal rotation. This drill is really important because a lot of people, especially bigger lifters, struggle with hip internal rotation. So if we don't have proper hip internal rotation, we are loading into other structures when we're getting into the squat, because your body is task oriented. It does not necessarily think, hey, I need to internally rotate my femur in order to access this range of motion. It just says, hey, I'm restricted here, so what am I going to do? I'm going to find a way to get into that range of motion, whether that's tucking your pelvis underneath or shifting from one side to another or doing something. Now, the problem with this is, especially as you get stronger, if these compensation patterns are not corrected or at least maintained within certain parameters, it can potentially lead to risk of injury, increase your risk of injury, and it can also limit your performance, because if this is a bottleneck and you can't actually exceed that unless you've addressed it, then this is going to be a major issue. So hip internal IR is a big focus, especially for the bigger squatters. Okay, then we're going to do B-stance banded RDL. Again, this is really just going to help enhance your ability to get into internal rotation and then external rotation, as well as hip extension. So this is helping prime the movements that we're going to be doing on that day. Lastly, we're going to do a single leg hip thrust with a contralateral load and a band around our hips. So I'll explain a little bit more about what we're doing, but essentially we want to get into an anti-rotation moment while we're getting into hip extension. So this is going to help stabilize the pelvis through hip flexion and hip extension, which is super important when we're going into our squat. So let's get right into the exercises. The first one we're going to start with is the banded dead bug.
Hey guys, if you like and want to support the podcast, remember we have limited edition items. These items can range anywhere from t-shirts, tank tops, sweatshirts, cups. You never know what you're going to get. Check them out at www.elitefts.com.
So there's lots of different variations of the dead bug. One of the reasons why I like utilizing a band where you're just going to hook a band up kind of over your head and have it here is because doing this engages the lats. It also engages the core and pulls the rib cage down. One of the big things people struggle with in the squat is they flare their rib cage up. Again, we don't want this kind of open scissor position. We want to make sure we're connecting the rib cage into the pelvis so we have better lumbopelvic orientation. So utilizing the band, we'll just kind of bring this up here. That way we have constant tension into the lats, into the core. Bring the knees up. Again, really focusing on keeping the rib cage down. Now, from here, lower the leg, come back up, alternate. So that's going to be the most basic one. From there, we can start making things a little bit more difficult. So we're going to start here, lowering down, coming back up. Okay, but this time we're keeping the legs straight. The entire time you're doing this, the rib cage is being forced into the ground. Okay, we don't want to be doing a setup like this. We want to be able to keep the back flat, but we're pulling the rib cage down and we're slightly tucking the pelvis underneath. This should be very hard. If you're not shaking doing this, because you're only going to do this for like 4 to 6 reps tops. If you're not shaking, you're probably not doing it correctly. Okay, so we've got 2 different types there. Then the last type we can do is we're going to be here, and we can load the arms overhead, bring them back up, go overhead, bring them back up. Okay, you can take 2 different bands and have alternating as well if you like, but again, that's going to be the progression from simplest to most complex. As I said earlier, if you're not shaking doing this, even just for 4 to 5 reps, you're probably not doing it right. You really want to be forcing the rib cage down. This should be very taxing for you here, and this can help develop that motor control. So when you go into the other exercises, we're going to have a higher degree of transferability of these warm-ups that we're doing. So the next one, we're just gonna try and get into external rotation. We're just gonna try and open up the hip in external rotation. So we're gonna hook the band up to some sort of, bench, bar, whatever it might be, and then we're gonna hook it up kind of around the upper thigh. So we're gonna walk forward, and I'm gonna get into this position here. Okay, so almost like a modified pigeon position, where I'm coming across my body with that front shin, back leg is supporting, and then the band is pulling back. Now what I'm gonna do from here is I'm gonna shift my hips back, okay, until I get a really, really intense stretch on the outside. You can also grab onto the band if you'd like and kind of just play with it a little bit and pull it down, okay, to get a little bit more of an intense stretch in there. And we'll just kind of hang out here and move around, just kind of explore the hip a little bit so you can kind of scour just a little bit. And we'll do this for about 1 to 2 minutes per side. This is just gonna kind of loosen up the tissues and give you a little bit more range of motion, make things a little bit more pliable. So when you go into some of the other exercises, you just feel a little bit more loose and less restricted, okay? So again, like I said, one of the reasons why you want to do this for about 1 to 2 minutes is because generally tissues don't respond that well to just very short stretching. You want to make sure you're doing it for about 1 to 2 minutes so you can actually get some sort of change in the connective tissue network, and that's going to give you more of a transient benefit, so it's not going to last for very long. However, because you're going from this movement to other movements and then right into your squat, it's going to last into your actual workout, and then that's going to help preserve and reinforce the new range of motion and movement capabilities. So now we're going to get into a banded hip internal rotation drill. This is really important because we don't just want to be stretching and doing things that are more passive. We want to make sure we're doing active movements to actually strengthen the hip in internal and external rotation, okay? So we're going to grab the band. I'm just going to put one foot in like that towards the ground, and we're going to get into a 90-90 position, okay? So one thing that's really important about this as well is you can see that the band is pulling me up that way, okay? If my knee was over here, the band is going to be pulling that way, which is not going to be pulling you into internal rotation quite as much, okay? So I like to make sure that the band is actually in front of my foot, so it's pulling me in the correct direction. So we're going to let it pull up like that into hip internal rotation. Then I'm going to drive my foot towards the ground, okay? You're going to feel that in your hip. So we're strengthening external and internal rotation ability, okay? Let it come up nice and slow, then come down. We don't want to be doing this, we're rocking the whole body, because then we're not really just moving the femur and the pelvis. We want to make sure the femur is articulating in the pelvis, okay? So we're coming down, holding for a moment, coming up nice and slow, holding it in range, flexing back down. We'll do about 10 to 12 reps on either side, okay? And then, on this side, and then we'll switch. And then that's going to help open up your hips quite a bit. Now, here's the thing. For me, I don't have amazing internal rotation, but I have enough to squat. So I'm over here. Some people can be like super, super upright and they can do this and it's no big deal. Other people might have to really, really lean forward. Either way, that's totally fine. Wherever you're starting, that's okay. Just make sure that over time, like for me, I started way, way over here and then I progressed to eventually, now I'm able to sit up, decently vertical and still able to get a decent amount of internal rotation. So you're just gonna try and slowly progress these things over time and make sure that when you're doing these reps, they're nice and clean, nice and smooth, and that way you can actually get into a better position in your squat. So now we're moving on to the B stance RDL with hip internal rotation. So this one's really good for actually driving us into a loaded hip internal rotation position and then getting into external rotation plus hip extension. So again, very effective for translating this into the squat. So you're just gonna grab onto a band, come out to the side, wanna be about, perpendicular to where we're facing. So if I'm facing this way, I want the band to be about perpendicular here. I'm gonna adopt a B stance, so I've got a slight split stance. Now, some people might stand a little bit wider here. Doesn't necessarily matter. Personally, I find this place a little bit more comfortable because it allows me to get into the greatest degree of internal rotation. Now, one mistake people often make when they're doing this is they focus on rotating their upper body, but their hips don't really move. This is not about upper body or trunk rotation. This is about hip internal rotation. So I want to try and drive this hip towards this knee. Okay, so I'm getting as much internal rotation as I can, and you're going to feel a good stretch on the outside of that hip. Okay, so again, we're in this stance. I'm going to load back as if I'm doing an RDL, but I'm rotating and I'm getting into deep hip internal rotation. Now I'm not rotating my upper body a ton. I'm only rotating as much as my hips are. Okay, now from here, I'm gonna squeeze my glute, drive into the big toe and the heel, and I'm gonna drive the hip forward, so out of internal rotation, into external rotation and hip extension. You're gonna slowly come back in, again, controlling the movement, getting a good pull, and if you need more tension, you just take a step away, okay? So again, here, really getting into that hip, maintaining a nice flat back position, focusing on the hip rotating, not the upper body, then squeezing the glute, driving through the big toe and the heel, coming back up again, squeezing and holding isometrically at the top before you slowly load back down, okay? This is really important because it's gonna help teach you to stabilize the pelvis while we're moving through internal and external rotation. So the last one, and this is actually one of my favorites, is the single leg hip thrust, or the single leg banded hip thrust with a contralateral load. So what contralateral means is if I'm doing a hip thrust like this with my right leg, I'm taking the weight and putting it on the opposite side hip. Okay, so the objective here is I want the weight to try and push me down so that I have to actively resist it and engage my glutes to stabilize. So what it does is it creates an anti-rotation moment, okay? And that's really important for when you're squatting, especially if you have any sort of hip shift or instability. So all you're gonna do, for us, we just hooked up the band to the pegs here. You can hook this up to anything you want, any sort of machine, any sort of squat rack, just figure it out, right? Put it on your hip, wherever it's comfortable. Upper back is gonna be on the bench, right? So kind of just below your shoulder blades. That's for me where it feels the most comfortable. Now again, we wanna be really cautious about our pelvic and rib cage orientation. A lot of the times when people do these, they come up and the rib cage flares and they extend to their back. So their erectors get a crazy pump, their quads get a pump, but they don't really feel anything in their glutes. So we want to avoid that by pulling the rib cage down. And this is a really common theme. Always want to be making sure that we're preserving the orientation of your lumbar, of your lumbopelvic complex, okay? So we're going to adopt a single leg stance. Now, if you want, you can just have a staggered stance where your foot is over there and it's touched the ground, or you can lift it up all the way off the ground. That's going to be a little bit harder. So that would kind of be the progression that I'd use. Now, we'll take the dumbbell. I'm going to start with the right leg. So I'll have the dumbbell on my left hip. So again, it's trying to pull me down. I got to stabilize by forcing it here. So I'm going to pull my rib cage down, come all the way down nice and slow, squeeze my glute, drive the hip up. So you can see I'm not getting into full hip extension exactly, because for me, I struggle with that. So if I go any higher, I do this. So I'm going to prioritize the range of motion that I can really do effectively, which might not be 100% of the range of motion, but over time, eventually I'll slowly increase that capacity. So again, I'm going down, making sure that my pelvis and everything is staying nice and neutral, pointed forward, coming back up, squeezing the top briefly, coming back down, okay? And we're just going to go through for 10 to 12 reps, holding at the top isometrically, controlling the eccentric on the way down, and then swapping sides. Now you might find that when you do this, you're actually going to feel the muscles slightly differently from side to side. If you do, that's actually pretty common, because most people have one hip that's a little stronger than the other. Maybe their medial hamstring is a little bit stronger than the medial hamstring on the other side. So you might feel it a little bit differently, totally fine. That's kind of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to address some of those imbalances so we can get everything primed to work really effectively in the squat so you're stable and you can perform just better.
All right, guys, thanks for watching the video to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and click here, 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 or here for more videos.
I'm Dan Paschalk. I'm the owner of Madtown Fitness in Madison, Wisconsin. As I progressed in powerlifting, I decided to open a gym. Did it right after I graduated college. Kind of was always searching around for good equipment. I was kind of stuck to the used market just because I couldn't afford new stuff, but I was always trying to pick up elite stuff. The last few years, as the gym's grown, I've finally gotten to that point where I could make that person that I called was Matt here at Elite FTS. We replace all of our free weights with elite stuff. We've got the combo racks, amazing stainless steel uprights, all these really awesome custom features. You know, not only does the elite stuff look awesome, but it really increased the durability of the equipment that we have in the gym, and just kind of like the functionality and the ease of use. It's stuff that can really hold up to heavy use. It's designed for powerlifters and for heavy lifting, but at the same time, it's stuff that the general fitness type of population can also use. It's really been a game changer for us. It's just been an awesome kind of renovation of our whole space, and it's like a whole new gym. So for the gym owners out there looking to make an awesome change within your facility, make sure you go to elitefts.com, pull up kind of the sales tab. You can send an email through there and ask for Matt, Matt. Otherwise, you can even call their customer service line and make sure they connect you to them. Matt will make sure that you get completely taken care of.